Hi, I'm Cody Anderson, one of the pastors at Parker United Methodist Church. Yesterday, I spent the day cleaning up my house. Not just a normal cleaning, but actually putting away all of my Christmas decorations. Now, I get really excited about that. I don't know if you do, but yesterday I was able to put away every ornament and make sure that it was in the right packaging. I was able to take time and put away all of the nativities and all of the Santas and all of that fun. Was able to take down the lights and put away the Christmas tree and then put things back in order. You know, the things that you have to shove aside so that you can fit your tree in that one space that it looks just gorgeous in. Well, I was able to do that and then vacuum up all of the glitter that is left over from my tree. Have you been able to put away your Christmas decorations yet? Now, I know I'm going against all things Coloradan because the stock show is still going on. There's a few more days left, I think, and we're supposed to leave our decorations up until the end of the stock show. But there just comes this time for me where Christmas, with all of its beauty and all of its magic and all of the brightness, starts to become not as beautiful. Like, I'm just done with it. I'm ready to put it away. I'm ready to get my house back in order. And it's not just because I'm ready for Christmas to be done and I'm ready just to put it all away, but also just all of the extra things just kind of feels like it's starting to close in on me. It's harder for me to get things done. I feel more distracted. I can't hear the voices as well. I just need the clutter to be out of my life. Same thing happens to me in other spaces, right? When my house isn't clean, then I feel like I cannot pay attention as much. I can't do the things that I really want to do because everything else feels like a mess. The same with my office. Now, if you've been into my office, you know that it is constantly in a state of chaos, but there are times where it is even more in a state of chaos that I absolutely have to get something clean before I'm allowed to do or able to do anything else. Please tell me I'm not the only one. Now, this is kind of like when you're in the car and you're trying to find that certain location and it's really hard to have the radio on and also be able to look at street signs, so you have to turn down the volume. Or when the weather gets bad and you just have to really focus, you turn down the volume. So this week we've been thinking about knowing the voice of God. And I've been thinking a lot about that, about how do we know the voice of God that is speaking into our lives from all of the other chaos and noises and voices that continue to bombard our lives. How do we know the voice of God? So this Sunday, we looked at the scripture about Jesus being the good shepherd and us, the sheep, and how the good shepherd will speak and the sheep will know his voice. But I often wonder, especially as I look around our world, as I look around and hear other Christians who are talking, I often wonder if we're listening to the same shepherd. You know, I wonder which voice of Jesus are we all listening to, because there are so many different things that people who are saying that they are Jesus followers are doing and are saying that seem to be contradicting each other. How do we truly know the voice of God? Now, I grew up with parents who I knew their voice distinctly from all other voices, right? I could be in the middle of a huge store, but I could hear my mom's voice above all the other voices. Or I could be playing in a basketball game and everybody is cheering and the whistle's blowing and everything is loud, but I could hear my parents' voice cheering me on. How do we know? How can we be so sure of God's voice that is speaking into our lives? Well, I think that's kind of the whole purpose of this sermon series, is trying to understand how God speaks to us and trying to know the voice of God. So there's a lot of different ways that we can know the voice of God, right? We always, as United Methodists, start off with scripture that has been given to us through the centuries of people who have experienced God in their lives. We started off this sermon series with the story of Samuel, who hears God's voice in the middle of the night, but doesn't recognize it. But somebody else is there, Eli is there, to help him know the voice of God, to help him first understand that voice that is calling to him. And so also through scripture, we realize that there's community around us, community that helps us understand God's voice, know God's voice that is speaking to us. So that's one way, is through community. It's through sharing our stories about how we hear God and how we understand God, and to be able to listen to others and how they also understand God, and maybe to decipher, to discern, to figure out if it's really God's voice that is speaking to us. So God's voice through relationship. That's how we can recognize sometimes God's voice. And when we mistake God's voice for something else, sometimes we need that community to remind us of who God is and the voice of God, and tell us, no, that's not God's voice. That's the voice of fear. That's the voice of anger. That is the voice of hate. That is not the voice of love, of goodness. So knowing God's voice through relationship, through community, but also listening to God's voice that is not always forceful. That's not that, hello, down there, do you hear me? But that voice that comes in a still small whisper. And that's where I experience God's voice. And that's also why I think I need to clean up things around me, right? Sometimes I need to remove the chaos, remove the static, remove the extra noise so that I can be in tune with God in my life. Sometimes I need to just sit and to be still and to see what may come, to block out all the other noises and to center myself in who God is. And then the other way is how we know God's voice is that it aligns with God's character, right? That's why reading scripture is really important, is for us to know who God is, and also how do we experience God in our lives, to know God's character that is still alive today. So I love the scripture that comes to us from Galatians, where it talks about the fruit of the Spirit, right? The fruit of the Spirit is peace, joy, goodness, love, self-control, some other things. There's 9 of them, right? But that's the way that we know God's voice. Is it good? Does it bring peace? Does it bring joy? Does it bring hope? Is it full of love? We can know God's voice by aligning it, putting it up against what we know is true about God's character. And finally, just listening, it's an act of trust, right? We got to trust that God is speaking into our lives, is speaking to us. We also have to be open to listening, open to the mystery of how God might speak to us, open to something that might be a little bit different than what we believe or how we want to react, or you name it. So I don't know a lot about sheep, and I don't know really much about shepherds, but there are some really funny videos that I love to watch on YouTube about sheep. And one of my favorites that keeps popping up into my head is a sheep who is let out of a gate and who immediately jumps into this like crevice. There's this like pretty narrow crevice, but the sheep, for whatever reason, jumps right in there and gets stuck and then calls out for help. And so the shepherd, or the person who owns the sheep, is laughing and goes and has to struggle to get this sheep out of this tight little area. Finally gets that sheep out of that tight little area. The sheep bounds off about 3 bounding steps away and goes right back into another crevice. Gets stuck again. Sheep aren't always the brightest, is what I've always heard. And so sometimes we are going to get stuck in that same crevice where we aren't sure if it's God's voice, or maybe we listen to something else that isn't God's voice and we get off track. But God will always come back for us. God will always remind us of that love and that goodness that rescues us, that cares for us, that wants what is best for us and for all around us. So as we continue to journey and think about how we can hear God's voice, how we can know that it is God's voice, I encourage you to just take some moments to sit, to breathe, to be able to find space to push out all the other noises, turn down that radio volume, and really tune into who God is, who God's character is, who God is in Scripture, and who God continues to be today. And align yourself with that voice that continues to seek you out, that voice that continues to call you back, that voice that is full of love and will always rescue you, save you, bring you back into the fold. May we tune our lives to hear God's voice, calling us to go and to make a difference in the world.